She is the Assistant Professor of Pediatrics at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine, and she is also an international presenter and lecturer, speaker on topics that are related to language and learning. And she is also our staff developer at Gateway. So I would like to welcome Lydia Soifer, Dr. Lydia Soifer. Before we get started, would you please silence your phones?
Am I amplified? Did I hit the button? What I was going to say is, unless you have a sick child at home or expecting a baby, grandchild, so turn off the phone. But this is a mature group. She's not going to be texting, although I have learned that when I see people sitting like this and I walk over and give them that grown-up teacher, I am your mother look, I'm taking notes, And so I've learned. Can you hear me back there? Yes, so I am amplified. Oh, do we have a lot about which to talk this evening, and not even enough time. So think of this to some degree as topics. So there's an opportunity to present a number of subjects. Well, of course, there's not enough time to explore them in great depth. So the idea is to give you something of an overview and to help you look at math and math learning and math difficulties in the children that we teach, with whom we live, these teachers we educate in a broader and in a somewhat different way. So the real name of this game is, can I change the slide? No, go on. There you go. So the title for this talk is about Mathland. Let me tell you a story about Mathland. Many years ago, I was in a math class in another school, not Gateway, and the teacher had written on the board the answer to a problem that had been given to the children. And she called on one of the youngsters, and he needed to read the answer, and he said, 114.7, which provoked an enormous amount of laughter from his 8th grade peers, given that most of them are 8th grade boys, and they are inclined to that kind of behavior. Well, he was humiliated, and the teacher then said to them, let's stop. She erased the board, and she looked at the group of children and said, what language do they speak in France? And they looked at her as if she was strange, and French. And what language do they speak in Italy? Italian, that tone of voice that they can use, and so on, Spain and Greece. And then she turned to the board that she had erased, and in letters that seemed unusually high, she wrote the word Mathland. And she said to them, you and I are in Mathland, and in Mathland we speak math. It is the language of Mathland. And she proceeded to tell them that in Mathland, that was read as 114.7 or 114 7/10, not dot. And that then there was a lesson on decency and humanity and not laughing at each other. So the question to be answered for this evening is, where is Mathland? Where is Mathland? Well, Mathland is in any classroom where teachers are working hard to help children with language and or learning disabilities to acquire knowledge and skills, talk to them in the language of math. So as we travel together into Mathland, because we're going on a little trip tonight, I want to make the point to you that math learning disabilities are not at all rare. In fact, it's only recently that in relative terms they're becoming the greater focus of research. So much energy has gone into the research of reading disabilities. And so now, as the research in math learning and disabilities has become more of the focus of researchers, it has become more the focus of educators. They are not a recent discovery, these math disabilities, not at all. It's just that because they've been the focus of less research, fewer educators are knowledgeable about them. In addition to which, as you will see in Mathland, math disabilities are not at all simple. This isn't arithmetic, it's simply calculation. In fact, they pose really, truly complex challenges to the teaching of math as well as to the learning of math. You'll see that this is a multi-layered, highly integrated system. And finally, you're going to hear that math difficulties are not at all inconsequential. In fact, they pose very serious educational, emotional, and life effects. So come on along. We're on our way to Mathland. So let's talk about some basic terminology. And please note, not everyone agrees on a definition. That bibliography reflects some of the reading that I have done as I prepared for this talk, and I could not find someone who said, this is the definition of a math disability. So not everybody agrees. Largely it refers to those children with markedly poor skills and employing basic computational processes and the cognitive processes necessary to solve equations. So you're going to see that this may include problems in working memory, problems in language, problems in executive functioning, and problems, or as it says, faulty visual spatial skills. So you can see some of the basic addition problems. And we've watched kids very gloriously count by tens to 100, only to go and skip directly then to 200, 300, because you'll recognize the pattern of recitation without conceptualization or without comprehension. So we know that math difficulties create lifelong problems for children, and now we are pushing ourselves more directly at the research and investigation of them. Dyscalculia, the math disorder as it is often called, is considered a neurodevelopmental disorder. It has finally gotten a very fancy multisyllabic title. And as such, what we have to be attuned to is that it implicates a large array of underlying cognitive processes that are not immediately recognizable. Visual spatial function. You're going to hear certain of these words over and over again. Visual and verbal working memory. There's a whole section this evening on working memory, on attention, and on language functioning. Because remember, in Mathland, we speak math, and that is not the language of all other classes. So the other thing to keep in mind, not only are math disorders and dyscalculia not simple, they're not fully understood yet. So we're talking about there's a series of complex underlying processes that underlie math disabilities, and what it does is let us know the present state of neurosciences research, which is not yet robustly established in the same way it is for children with reading disabilities. Oh, there's something else to know. Not all math disabilities are inborn. Some of those math disabilities that we see in the older children are in fact created in school. They're created in the schools where the teachers have not offered consistent teaching because, not willfully, they haven't been properly trained. So we see that poor or inconsistent teaching, inadequate resources, and not always consistently adequate teacher training can in fact create math disabilities for children. So let's take a little walk on this long and windy road into Mathland. Some people underestimate babies. My babies are no longer babies, so I no longer underestimate what it means to have a baby. They're supposed to deliver grandchildren, but they're not often. We used to underestimate babies a whole lot more because we didn't have the means to fully understand what babies can know. Mathematics learning, like all learning, begins in infancy. And there is the research that is available, all the different neurological studies that they can do. This, we're going to be talking about the first part of the road. Von Aster and Scheele, who are in your bibliography, describe 4 separate stages, but contiguous stages, of acquisition of number competence that begin in the neonatal period, right, and continue through elementary school. There are 4 steps in this process. And this is an interesting word, so get ready. They say that neonates have the ability to subtypes, from the Latin word subito, which means quick, all right, or sudden. And that skill, that ability, is innate, and is nonverbal ability to detect at a quick glance the number volume of items in an array. Now, can the baby look up at you and say, Mom, after you give me some more peas and carrots, could you replace the 5 things that are over there and make them 6? Of course not. But the research shows that they can recognize the difference between 2 arrays of randomly collected objects in infancy. What we know is that this subtitizing skill that the babies have continues to develop throughout childhood. And when you can't do that, people don't recognize it until you can't use the skill for mathematics. By 3 or 4, our little preschoolers now develop a more abstract number sense, and they come to recognize the unique nature of numbers, which is in the parlance of Mathland called cardinality. Not a word that you discuss over dinner, but that's the concept. And we're going to get to that notion of the language of Mathland in a little while. So the uniqueness or the cardinality of each number, as well as the ordinality, which in plain English means that numbers occur in a sequence, and that sequence is the same in accounting order. And eventually what they come to learn is that the last digit in the sequence provides the exact total of the number of items that you count. We don't think about it. We don't use those words on a regular basis. Now, by the 1st grade these days, children can link number names to the symbols, to the digit symbols, and plant that in your minds as well, because the language of math includes the words for math, the symbols for math, and the objects that we are counting. Right? And they can understand what happens when you're adding or subtracting 1 from a set, and they can give fast and memorized answers to basic calculation problems, usually up to the number 5. And what we know is that by the time they are in early elementary school, they can count multiple sets of objects and add them together. These first steps are the foundations of subsequent math learning. It starts early. All you have to think about is when you were put in the position of having to learn polynomials or some other representation that is more abstract. The roots of that happen before you get to the 1st grade. I can assure you that competency in math really and truly matters. The literature is very, very, very clear that those with chronic poor performance in math lead to lower levels of employment. We know that to be true. There was a large-scale study of 17,000 people followed from birth through adulthood. And these people were evaluated annually in everyday forms of testing, forms of use of literacy and of mathematics usage. And to control for any confounding effects, the researchers focused not on those people who did not go to college. So these were high school educated people, and they studied 2 sets of them, 2 large groups. Ones who had average math and reading skills, and the second group who had average reading but below average math skills. You ready? For both men and women. Both men and women. Poor math skills were associated with 4 rather unfortunate characteristics or results. Lower rate of full-time employment, number 1. Number 2, higher rates of employment in lower paying manual labor jobs, more frequent periods of unemployment, and finally, and this one was bothersome when I read it, a lower ability to take advantage of their employers' offers of training programs because of a lack of a feeling of competence. So there was less of a sense of advancement. 17,000 people, in a study of many, many years' duration. So math difficulties are not casual and not insignificant in the quality of life. Now, what we know is that kindergarten kids, these 5-year-olds, who are at risk for math difficulties, they will, when we spot them early, these children who are followed will demonstrate difficulties in the 3rd grade, the 5th grade, and the 8th grade. It is a pattern of an accumulated deficit of lack of mathematics knowledge. Right? And what we know, in addition, is those little kindergartners, had somebody identified them in preschool. The research shows that reduced phonological working memory. We're going to talk a little bit more about working memory, but phonological, sound-related working memory, which we tend to think of in terms of math. That weakness was somewhat predictive of weaker numerical competencies. So we can spot them early while we're finding out if they can rhyme and collapse syllables and identify the first and second sound, the first sound and the last sound, because we're so concerned about their reading difficulties. Those who are having difficulties are also waving a little red flag at them that says, I'm not going to do so great in math either, by the way. And then, be alert that it is shown in many of the research studies that independent of socioeconomic factors, independent of IQ and emotional functioning, independent of literacy, below average mathematical abilities in kindergarten are predictive of poor mathematical abilities at high school graduation. We can spot them early, and we're just not always so clear about what to do with them. And I know that some of you are from nursery school backgrounds. Now, do not be fooled. Who here speaks French? Oh, then you will forgive me. That does not mean that I speak French. Je ne parle pas bien le français, je parle un petit peu, the accent is good, that's the extent. However, when preschoolers can recite 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, oh, they're so smart. But don't be deceived. This is rote memorization. Rote memorization of the verbal label for each digit. All right? That does not reference quantities. It's just a recitation. As in, I won't do it again in Spanish. I can do it in Spanish too. All right. So I thought I would do a little bit of neurology with you. What we know is that there isn't one location in the brain for math. It doesn't work that way. It just doesn't work that way. And in fact, what we know is that brain structures are cross-sectional. And this proves to be true on studies in infants, in preschool children, and adults. So we have multiple distributed brain structures, and you can see the reference there as well. The intraparietal sulcus we find, and this is bilateral, his representation of approximate quantities can be identified in that part of the brain. The ventral occipital temporal cortex, what they saw in these studies was this area of the brain was activated across a wide range of numerical tasks, but also, and this is important, the processing of orthographic structures, meaning the reading of the numbers and the reading of the words in the problem. The prefrontal cortex, we all know that when you've got a youngster with an attention deficit disorder, I teach teachers wherever I go not to be the kid's frontal lobe. We find ourselves doing that for them all the time. Well, the prefrontal cortex areas are activated in tasks related to mathematics that involve maintenance, focus, and retrieval of information. And then the bilateral anterior cingulate cortex is involved in error and conflict monitoring. Am I doing this right? Does that make sense? And sometimes the answers are outrageous, and the children don't realize that the answer doesn't make sense. And finally, the left temporal cortex, which several of the language speech pathologists in the audience recognize as related, is the language-related area of the brain, and that becomes important in the rehearsal and retrieval of math facts. So your brain is very actively involved in multiple areas in the learning of mathematics. And I will give a nickel to anyone who can say ventral occipitotemporal cortex 3 times fast. Because I practiced before I did this. Now, obviously there's going to be a relationship between the math brain and the reading brain. We saw that in the earlier reference to the fact that the children who have weak phonological working memory skills, obviously that's going to affect their reading, their literacy skills, but also it's going to affect their math skills. So reading research, we know about reading disability. We talk about the crucial importance of phonological and then phonemic awareness. And we know that difficulties in that area can be predicted by weaknesses in verbal comprehension. I'm going to tell you what I know you already know. Naming speed, processing speed, and working memory. One of the things that I would say to teachers when I would go into nursery school classes is that I can spot the 3-year-olds who are at risk for learning reading difficulties for a series of very obvious reasons. One is they can't remember their friends' names. 2, they don't know the names of colors. They can't rhyme. They don't learn the rhymes quickly. You can spot those kids. I watch them during circle, and I can see who is going to be vulnerable. But what we now know is those kids are also going to be vulnerable for math learning difficulties because the math disability has a similar pattern. And it shows that there are weaknesses in verbal comprehension, weaknesses in working memory, which we're going to discuss in greater detail down the pike, difficulty shifting set, and slow processing speed. How quickly can you take in and make sense of it? So what we have is some shared and multiple cognitive components. What we know is that kids with math disabilities have a tendency to show poor fluency in retrieval of math facts, and that is analogous to poor phonemic awareness. There's your pattern, number 1. Number 2, in much the same way that whole language was wrong, dead wrong, as the way children learn to read. How many of you saw the piece in the New York Times on Sunday? If you haven't thrown the paper out, it's in the Sunday review section, because people are still now talking about whole language as the way to teach children to read. 2 years ago, I was asked to present to the school district to make the case that it is not a valid approach. So we saw that teachers are still being taught in university settings whole language techniques. So there are continued misconceptions about math instruction and in math educational programs in university. You've heard this. Oh, don't worry about mastering the facts. There are calculators and computers to support you, all right? Sadly, that is completely wrong. It's not enough. You know why? Because math is a great deal more than calculation. It is conceptualization. And no calculator is going to give you conceptualization. They're not going to give you the concepts. It is the conceptualization and all that goes with it from a cognitive, linguistic, thinking and language. When I think of the number of IEP meetings in which I sat, or the number of IEPs that I've read with use of a calculator as an accommodation, I'm struck, really struck, by the significant failure to understand the complex nature of math learning needs. It's not that simple. Now, we can't talk about assessment in great length. We'll do that another night or in another venue. We're touching, as I told you, this is a tapas dinner, sort of like that one. So we're touching on a lot of subjects. At this stage in our understanding of literacy development, disorders, and treatment, it's pretty clear what we know and what we have to do in terms of diagnosis and treatment. However, the tests to use to measure math accomplishments, math achievement, have a tendency to confound multiple components of math with a tendency to either focus on computation or on problem solving. So what we realize more and more is what's being tested in math is math reasoning and language reasoning over computation. This is not just about decontextualized counting, identifying numbers, number comparison. It is a great deal more than that. So when we look, I chose the two most commonly administered diagnostic measures. What we want to do is expand the interpretation of a child's potential math ability or present math ability or disability in investigation of very specific sub-skills that need to be considered in testing. For example, spatial relations, which do not necessarily show up in the math testing part of things. Sequencing ability, we think of it in terms of language, in terms of storytelling, but ongoing disruptions in sequencing ability are going to have a very negative impact on mathematics learning. The ability to approximate numbers and the challenges of the language of mathematics. Remember, we are in math land. And then the identification of what are called primitives. These are core math abilities that are predictive of later math difficulties, sort of like phonological or phonic awareness is predictive of reading. What we have to realize is that standardized tests in formalized situations are not the same as the testing that gets done in school. They differ from school formats, and in fact, in school, you have all sorts of scaffolds. In standardized measures, you do not always have those scaffolds, such as graph data or column labeling. So there's a lot that needs to be investigated that standardized tests in math ability tend to ignore. And for those of you who do this on a regular basis, we can talk more about it. So take a look quickly at all of the components of math. This is a wonderful volume by Tokuhama Espinoza, which is a brain science orientation for teachers. It is also in your bibliography. So she's listed 10 different components of math. I want you to hold on to this because in a few minutes we're going to be talking about subtypes of math disabilities. So it becomes important to understand what are the skills that one has to have in order to function mathematically. Right? So the declarative knowledge, you know what your calculations are. You know how to do that. Procedural knowledge, and we're going to talk about fraction adding in a little while, but the least common denominator, and then there's ordinality and cardinality coming right back at you again. And think about it in terms of the graphing skills that a kid has to have, and think about the youngster, and you're going to hear about it in a moment, with poor graphomotor skills or poor spatial perception, and what he has to do to tolerate graphing. Right. This part I thought was particularly interesting to continue to look at the sub-skill. Visual Arabic coding skills. That's recognizing numbers. The same way you know that this is the letter B, you know that this is the number 2. And then there's this B, and then there's this 2. So children have to differentiate among them by font, for example. And we don't think about it if you always see it that way. I watched somebody today write the number 7. Europeans, that's common. And in fact, more than 40 years ago, when I was in Europe, That's an affectation that I assumed, and I've not given it up yet. Looks better to me. So it's also understanding concepts like even numbers versus odd numbers. You can see what the lists are and what the skill examples are. But think about the spatial skills, because when we're going to talk in a few moments about visual spatial difficulties, one of the things that was particularly interesting to me, and I made jokes about this for the last couple of weeks as I prepared this. I have degrees from good schools, very good schools, as a matter of fact. I failed one test in my entire academic career. Guess what it was? Math. And I know exactly why. Last night when I was talking to one of my sons, I told him I was preparing this presentation, and I said, what do you think it's going to be? What's my worst subject, honey? And he said, math. You're not doing something on math, are you? And I laughed, because I've really learned this, and as a result, I've learned about myself. So when you think about the spatial skills, I don't see in 3 dimensions. So there are certain subjects, aspects of math that were murder for me until I learned how to talk myself through what was supposed to be here, because I couldn't see. But you see, I'm not language impaired. So when you look at the sensory pathways, the ability to see, to hear, to write, and to speak adequately. And so apropos of my affected 7, the difference among 3, the Roman numeral 3, the word 3, and 3 items to count. Do you realize there's a dialectic quality to the language of Mathland? So hold on to these, because we're going to talk in a moment about subtypes of math learning disability. Now, many years ago, I had a picture hanging in my office of 2 men standing atop a sand dune against an azure sky. Their arms were folded like this, and they were leaning against each other. They were barefoot, and each was wearing a white 3-piece suit. One of those men was the jockey Willie Shoemaker, who was, if I remember correctly, about 4'10". And the other man who was leaning against him was Will Chamberlain, who was about 6'10". They were a sight. And I used to say to the children, look at the picture and tell me, what is a man? Because those are both men. So you have to recognize the range of differences. So math disabilities, like people, come in a variety of shapes and sizes. There isn't one. And Geary, who you will see referenced in your bibliography again and again, has categorized math disabilities into these 3 subtypes. What is important to know about all of this information? I'm the one with the visual spatial problem, but my language skills are good. These are the characteristics of people with different forms of math disability. Why is that important? Because the diagnosis and then the teaching must be specific. What is the specific nature of the disability that this child is experiencing in which of these domains? Now, it's possible that you have one, or it's possible that you have vulnerabilities or disabilities in all of these areas. So you have to be a particularly good diagnostician, and you have to be a remarkably good diagnostic teacher in order to identify the need or help a youngster compensate for a variety of specific math difficulties. So you need a strong knowledge base, and you need very superb diagnostic skills. Now, consider this slide and its brother, which is the continuation. Okay? In the context of the previous slides that I showed you of the components of math. So it requires that teachers understand the true nature of math disabilities, and that they create well-structured programs that support sequence and skill development in a hierarchical way, with a well-structured program that is both multisensory and experiential, especially when the children have language impairments. Because as some of you have heard me say many times, language is based on experience, and math is not a commonly spoken language. So by giving the children the experience, the physical, concrete experience, and attaching the words, and I will show you an example later, it makes a world of difference for how to teach a specific child. The bottom line here is that the awareness of these subtypes juxtaposed to the sets of skills or the components of math knowledge is incredibly, incredibly potent, because not all math difficulties, math disabilities have the same pattern, and the children do not have the same profile. There's not one form of this. I want you, in a concrete example, to think of it this way. Here's the question. What is a square number? All right? There are 3 ways to answer this question. There's a linguistic dimension. So the answer is, come on, call out. You don't even have to raise your hands. What is the linguistic dimension? All right, a square number is the product of a number multiplied by itself. Has anybody uttered a sentence like that today? Good, then I'll come have dinner at your house, because if you talk at our house, I don't want dinner. Then there's the numerative dimension. Listen to the language. And that is 4 times 4 equals or is the same as 4 squared. And then there's the visual spatial dimension, a 4 by 4. 3 different ways to answer the same question. And the language of the answers is variable and not common. Remember, we're in Mathland. Classroom language dynamics, and who is this child and effective teaching components of the program, are conceptualization and teacher education program that I developed over the course of many years. What I want you to do, that's why this picture is here, because I want you to keep the image in mind as we proceed to talk about math disabilities and the dynamic nature of learning in the context of skilled teaching. From that image, we are going to focus tonight on working memory, on language, on executive function, and very importantly, on the emotional aspects of math disabilities. Alrighty? So just as a quick overview, Classroom Language Dynamics is a teacher training program that has been developed, and what it does is it's for mainstream schools as well as specialized schools to go in and help educators develop understandings and offer them very specific tools that are designed to improve student academic performance. And so what we do is analyze the individual style of each child and help teachers develop systems for doing exactly that, the youngster's strengths and his weaknesses. And we develop a common language for talking about the way the children are learning and how they need to be taught. All the strategies and techniques come out of the research. It's essentially an educator-focused program that we have. There are several of you from schools where it has been used. Now, what I want you to see here is that we are also looking at its relationship to the notion of effective teaching, the why, what, and how of teaching. And so we're looking at a teacher training paradigm that says, for the teacher, what do I have to teach? How do I have to teach it? And why must I teach it this way to these students? For the teachers, that's the content, history or mathematics, but it's also what skills do I have to teach the child in order to learn this? And so lesson plans are always formatted with 2 sets, with 2 frames of reference. For the children, from a very metacognitive point of view, the children come to understand what this teacher is teaching me, how she's teaching it to me, and why she teaches it that way, because that's how I learn. So when I go to a different teacher, to another teacher, to a different school, I can say, I learned this way. This is what works for me. All right. Now that doesn't always work for the student. I had a young woman go off to, I will not say the name of the school, but they don't have a good football team, so I don't have respect for them anyway. And last year I went to Penn State. And, so she goes to her professor. She's in a survey class, 300 kids. This youngster, learning disabled, now a successful businesswoman, has never been able to learn to take a multiple choice test. She goes to the professor and says, I'm not asking for anything particularly special. I'm not asking for your pity because I have a learning disability, but I know the nature of my disability, and I cannot demonstrate my knowledge to you in a multiple choice format. May I do an independent study? You choose it, I'll prepare it. How's that? I can demonstrate my knowledge. And you know what he said? No, there are 300 of you and I don't have time to look at the paper. But she knew what she needed. And that's what's an important aspect of effective teaching, is we also teach the children how they learn and why they learn that way, so that they become empowered in the same exact way. So what we do in all the programming, and specifically at Gateway, we have a very structured system of guided planning among the teachers and the coaches, specific formats for observation, and very particular feedback, and everybody is coming from this point of view. So we teach the children not only the nitty-gritty of the subject area, but how we are teaching it and why we are teaching it that way. I was telling someone before, do you see this, who is this child image and the date on it? 2006. Its original version didn't look like this. It was somewhat more simplistic. The little boy about whom it was drawn as a result of an elaborate evaluation had been identified as emotionally disturbed, and in fact he was seriously language impaired and learning disabled. And we were able to ascertain that, and he had an enormous number of sensory issues. And so we drew this to help his parents understand all the dynamics, and he felt very adaptedly about himself. Well, over the course of time, this evolved into a more refined representation with the extension of the effective teaching model. And as I told Mrs. Galante, I had the great pleasure of going to his high school graduation this past June. He is now enrolled in college. And we thought, the school told his parents, get him a job because he's never going to college. All right, so you have to look at the child in a multi-dimensional way. So before we start to talk about the language, the executive functions, the working memory, and emotion, I want to stress the crucial role of play in all learning for children, and certainly in mathematical thinking. You know, kindergarten was the new first grade, became the new first grade, and then when I go into 3-year-old classes, I tell teachers, no, we're not doing the letter of the week. They need to play, and that's important. This story about bank holidays and the dads in finance, in the years that I was the director of a private developmental clinic, we had two-way mirrors. And on bank holidays, the dads would come in and they would sit on the stools that the moms sat in all the rest of the time. And they would be watching the lessons through the window. And I would walk by and stop and chat with them. And I cannot tell you how many times some dad would look at me and say, you know, I'm paying you a lot of money, Dr. Soifer, for that woman to be playing with my kid. I'm from Brooklyn, you can't talk to me that way. And so I would smile and say, let me explain to you what she's doing. And I would identify, as each activity occurred, how this was determining relevant from irrelevant. This was determining sequencing patterns. This was developing a story narrative. This was helping him exercise it. And invariably, and there was always one day a year, he'd say, oh, okay. And then I could move on. Because it looks like play, but learning to talk is child's play, and play is the child's world. So we have to be alert. All you have to do is read yourself. Take a look at the importance of block play and water play. Well, the foundations of math in preschool play, think about it, classifying. You ready? Let's classify the red bugs and the blue bugs. All the nursery school teachers are nodding. Exploring magnitude. Is it big enough for us to climb on? Is it big enough so that it's the same height as his. This is the story of a little girl who loved rainbows. She loved rainbows, so she used, you all know Roy G. Biv, the mnemonic for the alphabet, for the colors of the rainbow. Well, what she did was she made a sequence of Roy G. Biv flowers, and a sequence of Roy G. Biv cats, and a sequence of Roy G. Biv houses. She used the concept of sequencing as part of her artwork and play. Enumerating, think about that. Saying the number words, counting, recognizing the number of objects, reading or writing numbers. All of this is part of nursery school play. It's all part of preschool play. How many of you have graphed the number of children who wear sneakers with laces versus sneakers with Velcro? How many wore yellow shirts today, and how many, you do it all the time, it's fall. Who likes green apples, red apples, yellow apples, or multicolored apples? That becomes graphing later on. It's play for them. And then, I'm sure you've seen, we make a big slice of, a big pizza out of Play-Doh, and you can cut it into 4 big slices or 8 smaller slices. All of that is preparation for math and what for the children looks like play. Am I right, Dr. Green? Thank you. And then there is the cognitive linguistic challenge of learning math. Cognitive thinking, knowledge, knowing, meaning, understanding, and the language with which we use to represent those concepts, to store those concepts, to share those concepts. So think about it. In other classes we have revolt, revolution, revolutionary. You've got a sequence of meanings. You have far less of that in math. So there's a reduced overlap with concepts and ideas and terms. Math vocabulary is both distinct, meaning that it's used only in math, and it is replete with multiple meaning words. Replete with multiple meaning words. So it also involves deciphering a whole gang of symbols, numbers, letters. Here, take a look. You've got to recognize that that's a division sign. Oh, but by the way, that also means division. And then there's this guy. So for the children with perceptual difficulties, with word finding difficulties, with working memory difficulties, with difficulties in shifting set because of attention deficit, these are challenges for them. In addition to it, when we're reading, we read from left to right, unless we're in a religious school, yeshiva, when we also read from right to left. But the shift is clear. That's not true in math. In math, you read left to right, you read top to bottom, and sometimes on an angle. If you're reading a graph, think about the amount of set shifting, all right? So also, math texts have a much denser concentration of abstract concepts, all right? Most academic texts do not have that much density. Some do, particularly in history, you'll see it. But there are more concepts per sentence to process in math than you would realize. All right? Every word is important to the process. You can't skim. You can't skim in math. And the grammar tends to be more complex. Hold on to this. Count the prepositional phrases. The ratios of the lengths of the sides of a right triangle. That's 3 prepositional phrases in one utterance. So for a child with a memory problem, with processing speed difficulties, that's a lot to manage. And as a rule, there's not extended discussion in math class the way there is about Scout and the way there is about Atticus or whatever else we are reading. We do not, as a rule, discuss why pi is pi. So let's talk about working memory for a little while. Okay. I want you to hold this image in your mind. Your working memory. Truly and truly, you're nothing about it. You don't have a good working memory, you're not going to look nearly as smart as you are. Your working memory is, in effect, your brain's Post-it note. And as you well know, Post-it notes these days come in 3x5, 5x7, 3x3, 2x2, and if you're the kid with the 2x2 Post-it notes that's working memory, you're in more trouble than the guy with the 5x7. Because in order to hold on, to proceed with what you're reading, to proceed with what you're calculating, to hold on to the question and find the search for the answer, you have to be able to hold the information in working memory. And poor working memory makes it hard in at least these three areas. Pulling out the math facts, remembering how to read the numbers, the mental math. You all know this, you're in the supermarket, you reach for your phone. Why? Because when you have to do when you have to add multiple numbers, you've got to use this visual sketch pad in your head. So the other day, I was in Lord & Taylor. And I began to calculate the cost of too many things that I purchased in Lord & Taylor. And you know what I ended up doing? I rounded to the nearest 10, and in some instances, the nearest 100. They will all be returned shortly. That's too much money to spend in Lord & Taylor. That said, I couldn't hold on to $149.69 and add to that $94.22. Geez, I have a good working memory. Bag it. I knew a strategy. And I have a good working memory, so think about it. Think about the role of your working memory. For any of you who are taking notes, you cannot take notes if you don't have a good working memory. All right? Now, those of you who are using laptops or iPads are relieved of the burden of remembering how to shape the letters. So don't underestimate, and especially if the teacher is talking quickly. So you've got to get this information in, and you have to have enough space to hold on to it so you can subsequently use it, all right? So you have to be alert. When you see low working memory scores in any psychoeducational testing, it is a warning sign. Now, I'm going to show you an example of the issue that we encounter with visual spatial, the sketch pad. Would somebody be kind enough to show me with their hands an acute angle and then an obtuse angle? There you go. And so there's your acute angle. Can you show me? Thank you, Chava. An obtuse angle. All right. Mrs. Rachel and I were doing this at school at Gateway the other day. What would make you know that an acute angle is acute and an obtuse angle is obtuse? Unless you learned it from the teacher. If you don't recognize the pattern, do you know how I remembered obtuse? Because ob also is part of obese, and that angle is wider and fatter. Because I don't have the visual sketch pad that other people have. I have to attach words to things. So be alert to that. I don't have enough space. So picture the kid who doesn't, who can't do the mental math. All right? And geometry is the main physics business. All right, now, how many of you took foreign language in college? Yeah. There you go, just about everybody. This quote is a perfect one. And I count math as a foreign language for my college entrance. All right? Je ne parle pas bien de math. All right? Now, hold on to working memory as we move to math. As we move to language. Hold on to it. Because depending upon the size of your working memory, it will be hard to hold on to a lot of linguistic information. Look at that list of multiple meaning words. That's the language of men. And you can come up with another meaning for virtually all of them. Children have to understand the language of men. It has a distinct vocabulary with many multiple meaning words. The grammar is very, very precise. I can be imprecise if I'm speaking in standard English. I can say, I really think that's a wonderful shirt. I mean, honestly, if I had seen that one in Lord & Taylor, I spent enough money, but I might have bought that for myself as well. All right. Try doing that in a math problem. All right. What I want you to do is calculate the number of women in this room. I mean, it doesn't make a difference what kind of shoes they're wearing. But I want you to calculate whether or not they're wearing shoes or boots. And I understand that boots are a form of shoe. You don't do that. You don't do that. We're very specific in the language and the grammar that we use in that. So this will give you an income. So acquiring fluency in the language of Mathland is much more difficult. It requires more time and more cognitive effort than another subject might require. Now, take a look at this. I have categorized for you all the different words that are part of Mathland. There is a dialectal quality to the languages of Mathland. So it's critical that we as educators in our pedagogy understand this very important concept, that math words, everyone, are mostly used to translate visual, spatial, and quantitative concepts into a set of symbols that can be easily manipulated, or more easily manipulated than the abstractions they represent. And I will purchase a beverage of your choice if you can repeat that sentence. And that doesn't mean you, because you're recording this. Do you realize that sentence? The complexity of that sentence? I'm going to say it again. It is critical for all of us who teach math, or teach teachers to teach math, to understand that math words, dialect of math, is used to translate visual, spatial, what you see within space, and quantitative concepts, how many, into a set of symbols, plus, minus, equal, greater than, less than, that can be more easily manipulated than all of the mental abstractions that they represent. It's a devil of a lot easier to do this. Nine is greater than 2, so that symbol, all right? Than having to write it all out all the time. So you have to be alert that we are switching in and out of language. Now, in your bibliography, you'll find a book by a fellow named, I believe it's pronounced Bley, B-L-E-Y, which is a very, very available volume for teachers. It's written in a way that makes it approachable for those who are looking for strategies. It's a gold mine. It's just a gold mine. Clear, thoughtful examples. This is an example that I took from Bley. And by the way, I want you to listen really carefully, because this is what it means to be language impaired and have to deal with that. Mom said to be home in 3/4 of an hour, but I thought hours had minutes, not quarters. Did you hear yourselves all day? You know how dumb that kid must have felt? Now we're going to get to that part. In isolation, all right, or when given adequate time and a proper number of cues, most kids can process that kind of problem. Most of them can. But just as when teaching a foreign language, I implore all educators and mommy and or daddy when helping with homework to take nothing for granted and to be specific as you can be in helping your child. because you are teaching in a foreign language. You're talking the language of Mathland. All right, so hold on to this statistic. Let me give you something, some sense of why language-based aspects of math learning and Mathland are so very important. Are you ready? 95% of children, 96% of children identified with learning disabilities have some form of language-based problem. 96%. I have said this so many times, this is one of the few presentations where I haven't used the image of a red Corvette racing across the screen. But language is the vehicle that drives the curriculum, completely regardless of what the curriculum is. In school, we use language to teach language to children who are very often language impaired. And it's not always easy to see. In addition, there is attention, executive function, working memory, and general cognition. Just think about the complexity of language. Can somebody give me a synonym for the word walk, please? Try. You got it? I can tiptoe. All right. Can you see them? Can you see the difference between meander? All right. And God help my poor left hip struck. Yes, you can see that. Now, you can see it. You know the different contexts in which those words are to be used. It's one thing if I stroll over to Matt, it's another thing if I sashay over to Matt. Now, let's shift into the language of Mathland. You ready? Subtract, minus, take away, fewer, less than, reducing, less, as in 21 less 3, from, decrease, reduce by. Want me to go on? Those are all synonyms of the same concept. But I can saunter, or I can strut, or I can trot, or I can tiptoe, and you can see, and you can tell. You're in Mathland. So now we talked about working memory, we've talked about language. Let's talk briefly about executive functions so that we can sum up and complete. All right. Executive functions are crucial, as you by now must know. So you can take a look here and see the nature of the executive dysfunction and the kind of math disability or math difficulty that is manifested as a result. Right? So if they can't maintain their attention, they're going to get lost in the procedure. You've seen it enough times. I forgot what I was supposed to do. Oh, sure. Okay. This is where I get the warning sign from behind about the hook. I'll talk faster, because I want you to hear some of this. The name of the game for all teachers of math is to break down into the smallest steps and then, one at a time, build them up again. So when kids get lost in the steps of a procedure, scaffold them until they learn them over and over and over and do them over and over. For poor attention to signs, you pick, honey, what do you want? You want to focus on the plus or the minus? And then they identify and you train them to say plus or add to, because there is a tendency to lose your focus and lose your attention when you're involved because you are distracted by outside sources. So anybody who's got an executive function disruption should make no assumptions about what they know or what they've heard. And you can see this pattern as well throughout. And be alert that for many, many, many of the boys and girls with attention deficit disorder who are not hyperactive, and I've said this for years and years. Oh, God bless them, they're sitting still. But that doesn't mean that that little brain is in the room with you. Not at all. So there's the second, there's the other part of the executive function. Just think of the difficulties in setting up a problem. Think of the difficulties in establishing the alignment. And when you see those frequent erasures, part of it is organization and another part of it is anxiety. Right? So we could, part of what happens, the one that always strikes me, is in self-monitoring. When I do talks on executive functions and we talk about self-regulation and self-monitoring, we're in New York, you all remember Ed Koch, right? The good late mayor, Ed Koch, used to walk through the boroughs of the city and say, hey, I'm Ed Koch, how am I doing? Right? Well, that's what the self-monitoring is. It's having Ed Koch sit on your shoulder saying, ask yourself how you're doing, kid. Because they don't follow. They want to get done, because the one who finishes first is the winner, all right? And as we referenced before, they don't always know when they're wrong. All right? And then how many times have you heard one of your teachers, you yourself say, but he knew it yesterday. Well, yesterday he was more focused. Yesterday, mommy remembered to give him his medicine. Yesterday, his brother, any number of them. Now, we're getting closer. The social, emotional. There's math anxiety, that feeling of stress and anxiety in situations that involve mathematical problem solving. Math anxious people have a tendency to avoid situations where they're going to have to deal with math, and those folks are less likely to pursue the STEM professions. There's so much emphasis on them now. We discussed earlier the long-term consequences of difficulty in math for professional development as well as for economics. And we also know there's a clear evidence in the neuropsychological research between, take note of this, heightened anxiety and its impact on working memory. And we started of the areas that we were going to discuss with working memory. Because if you don't have a good working memory, it's going to be hard for you to learn. Now, add anxiety to that, and what you get is negativity. All right, that's why we have, I use the image of a negative number, a severe limitation in cognitive flexibility when people are anxious. A negative cycle gets set off when you are anxious. Avoidance, reduced exposure to math. I don't want to take another math course. Weaker skills, anxiety. How many of you are familiar with the concept in literacy of the Matthew effect? I'll tell you briefly. The Matthew effect is the work of Keith Stanovich. And what he described, some of you may recognize the colloquial version of the Gospel of St. Matthew, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. So Stanovich writes about children who can decode and comprehend and read, who grow bigger and richer vocabulary knowledge. All right. But those children who can't decode or have comprehension problems choose not to read. And as a result, their vocabulary knowledge, which is crucial in reading and in writing, remains small. The rich get richer. Those who can read do, so they acquire more. Those who can't read don't. And it is the same thing with math. If you avoid it, if you don't practice it, if you blast through it, if you choose not to focus your full energy and attention on it, the quality of your learning is reduced. We know that anxiety directly affects working memory. We know that. And this was very striking, this representation. Think of anxiety as sort of a biochemical sponge that sucks out, that saps up, that pulls out the neural machinery of your cognitive ability, preventing your brain from shifting gears when manipulating complex mathematical data. And so, let me bring you to the gateway to Mathland. At Gateway, where I am a proud member done at Gateway is we modified the Singapore math program, because most math programs, as Mrs. Salzman referenced before, are not for special ed kids. So we have adapted the Singapore math program in view of our understanding of how they learn and how they have to be taught. It's a hierarchical program with very concrete and pictorial and more abstract representation. And because it is spliced into small parts, it is easier for us to adapt and to use. The program, again, is for typical learners, but it has a really fine sequence. Every lesson in Singapore math has to be broken down and taught in multiple lessons. It's not one and out, all right? Because we are constantly reestablishing essential concepts for them, because they have executive function difficulties, because their working memories are weaker, because their language impaired, and because some of them just plain take next and use them a bad habit. So adaptations are made at multiple levels in order to meet the needs of the particular learners. And we identify them within our system. We know who has more difficulties in working memory, who has greater organizational challenges, who has handwriting challenges. So there are worksheets and procedural steps to accommodate for their needs. So we have a very sharpened focus on what kind of math disability does he have and what kind of math disability does she have, which really helps, as I referenced before, the individualization. We are using the Classroom Language Dynamics program, and again, the system of guided planning and feedback, and all the teachers are very clear about how the math needs to be taught and why it needs to be taught that way. There are 4 components of Gateway's math instructional program, which is the concepts that we recommended, that we referenced. What concepts does he have? What concepts does he need? Because we don't make assumptions from a diagnostic point of view about the information that we get from any exam, from a formal neuropsych exam or a psychoeducational exam, for the reasons we referenced before. We are acutely aware of the language that we do, so that there's a great deal of modeling of processes and instructing the kids in the metacognitive processes. And we let them know absolutely that the benefits of this modeling is to improve your thinking. Getting to the answer is not magic. It's not magic. You have to figure it out, and I'm going to teach you how you have to do it. And it's a way of helping them become aware, conscious of their own thought processes. So it's not uncommon to hear kids say, well, I think I'm supposed to solve 4. And when they say it out loud, it becomes more concrete for them. We give them an opportunity to hear their own thinking. And we recognize that some of the kids have difficulty formulating those kinds of sentences, so we model the language for them and give them that language. And so in a normal standardized program, there's number sense. That's what we've been talking about earlier in terms of the subcategories of skills that involve computation. That's where the play part comes in as well. And then ultimately, as the children go over the application to word problems. All of it, and I've used this image many times. How many of you buy locks and Savons? Who buy locks and Savons? They bring in, at the end of the Jewish holidays, when there's a break fast, they bring in all the retired guys with good knife skills, right? And they slice that, the smoked salmon, very thin, and hold a piece up and look good. That's what we do. We slice the skills into the thinnest slices, because if I say, do you want a corned beef sandwich, and I put 1 piece of corned beef on that sandwich, you're never coming back into my restaurant. But if you go into the Carnegie Deli and you're foolish enough to order a corned beef sandwich and think you're going to eat it by yourself, you're not eating it by yourself. All right? That's what we do. We take all the slices and build it up, because we're very attuned to the different kinds of math disabilities. The foundations of teaching math skills, direct instruction. I know, I've got to stop. But direct instruction is, there's no exploration when we're teaching children with learning difficulties. And what I was just describing was task analysis. What are all the parts? And as Mrs. Halton said earlier, it is an approach to diagnostic teaching. What part did he not get? Why didn't he get it? How much of that is me? How much of that is him? What do I have to do different for him? And you'll see there is constant repetition. And one of the gripes we hear over and I did this already, why do I have to do it again? You've never heard that from anybody, have you? No. Just a dig. I can name all of your schools, I've been in them. So they always make that complaint. Why? Because it is stabilizing your skills and you're going to use it going forward. You're building. And practice. And what we say to the kids is, do you honestly think that Aaron Judge just comes to the plate and swings at his home runs? Advocate. Practice. All right? I often use the image of how do you get to Carnegie Hall, and people of a certain age will say, practice. But I have encountered people who now look at me and say, Uber? All right, so a lot of repetition, a lot of practice. Refresh, renew, refresh your knowledge, renew it, pull it from prior knowledge, wake it up, and let's use it again. And then, in closing, I want to come back to this image of who is this child. So there you see the image again. And there's the profile of a math disability as identified by those on. Slower in numeric processing, struggling with determining quantitative meaning of numbers, difficulty learning basic calculation procedures, being prone to procedural errors, misaligning numbers, using incorrect computational process, poor retrieval, basic facts. That's the simple summary. And so, there she is, poor, math disabled, little pumpkin. I keep her hair that color because it's Halloween tomorrow. However, hope springs eternal, my colleagues, and with continued research, with informed teacher education programs, with improved diagnostic processes and skill and knowledgeable teaching of the kind that we are oh so very proud to offer at Gateway School. These are the children that we will see learning and learning math. Thank you all so very much.